what are the options for you if you've had your shoulder fixed after a shoulder dislocation and then it keeps coming out again and again and again? So I'm Dr. Chris. This is a little bit informal today because I am on call. For those of you who are MMA fight fans, this past weekend was the fight between Brian Ortega and Yair Rodriguez, two excellent Mexican fighters. The fight was stopped prematurely in the first round because Brian Ortega suffered an injury to his right shoulder.
Oh, you see it. Pop, there it is. Oh, yeah. You can see it on the shoulder. You can see the shoulder out.
There are other videos on YouTube, including a video by Brian Sutter and a video by Dr. David Abbasi that talk more about the injury. And I'll briefly summarize that, but what I really want to focus on today is just on what are the options if this kind of thing has happened and you've had surgery. Coming into this fight, Brian Ortega has already had apparently 2 surgeries to his right shoulder because he has had a number of shoulder dislocations in the past. So if we look at the video here,
that causes another shot from Ortega. Good job there by
here we can see that Brian Ortega is trying to bring Yair Rodriguez to the ground using a move that's known as the whizzer. And when he does that, Yair retains a hold of Ortega's right arm and he attempts to perform an armbar. And you can see that when he's upside down, holding Ortega's arm, he has his thigh pressed against the back of Ortega's shoulder. And you can see the moment when the pressure of his thigh on the back of Ortega's shoulder while Ortega's arm is extended is enough to push the humeral head anteriorly out of the glenoid socket. So this is a shoulder dislocation after Ortega has already had 2 surgeries for his shoulder. So normally if you are a first-time dislocator, then we will perform what's called a shoulder stabilization. And this can be done in either an open or a closed fashion. And if we do it in a closed fashion, what I mean by that is that we're doing it arthroscopically through little small incisions. So we'll put a camera in, find the damaged structure, which is usually the anterior labrum, which is a soft tissue structure, which is pulled off the front of the glenoid. We will find the labrum, which is usually ripped off and down the front of the neck, and we'll bring it back and place it on top. So that's the typical procedure that we'll perform. And usually for first-time dislocators, it's only the labrum that is involved, although sometimes a small piece of bone, otherwise known as a bony bank heart, can be involved as well. So we will arthroscopically bring those structures back and place them on the front of the labrum. However, for some people, this is not enough, either because the labrum was deficient, we were not able to reattach it where it was supposed to go, or there is some amount of bone that is missing from the front of the glenoid. The other problem is if you have a large divot in the back of the head. And so normally when your head comes out of the joint and then it sits on the front of the glenoid, you get a divot in the back of the head, which is called a Hill-Sachs. And if that's large, then sometimes, even though we've fixed the labrum in the front, when you externally rotate your arm, that can still slide out and engage that Hill-Sachs lesion, and then your arm is out of the socket and dislocated. Give me 1 second. Yeah, so like I said, I'm on call. Now we have somebody who's been fixed and they've redislocated again. On some occasions, if the imaging, which is usually going to be MRI or MRI arthrogram, shows that the labrum has retorn, we can reattach that labrum a second time. It's not going to be as good as it was the first time, but we can do that. We can sometimes also back up the initial stabilization by doing what's called a remplissage. And that just means that we're going to take some anchors and attach the capsule that's on the back side of the humeral head into that divot that I talked about. The remplissage allows the posterior capsule, or the capsule on the back side of the shoulder joint, to act as a tether. So now when the head goes to come out, it's actually attached to the back, so the back of the capsule stops it from fully engaging with the front and then allowing that shoulder to slide out. For some people, when they do open shoulder stabilization, they will also do what's called an imbrication of the capsule. And that just means that they'll cut the capsule or the bag that's around the outside of the joint that holds the fluid in from top to bottom, and then they will overlap the edges and sew it together. So now you are tightening down the capsule. So not only have you repaired the labrum, but you're stopping the humeral head from coming out the front because you've made the capsule there tighter. So those are all soft tissue options. If all of those fail, what next? We can do what's called a Laterjet procedure. And this is where we take the coracoid, which is a structure on the front of the scapula, which sticks out on the front of the joint, just medial to the humeral head. We can cut that coracoid at its base and then move the coracoid from its current location to a location on the front aspect of the glenoid, so that we've now extended the bony surface that the humeral head engages with to prevent that humeral head from coming to the edge and then falling out. So we've actually just put a shelf here, and so now the humeral head can actually move further before it comes out of the joint. This is what we call a salvage procedure because it's not the first line procedure that we would do. And we do it for people who have had recurrent dislocation after they have had a shoulder stabilization in the past. And if all of that failed, the next option that is available, which again is another salvage option, is a humeral head osteotomy. And this is where we actually cut the humerus just below the humeral head, and we rotate the humeral head so that that Hill-Sachs divot on the back is now facing more towards the back, so that it is less likely to come out when you externally rotate your arm. That's another bony procedure, but that requires the humeral head to be severed from the shaft and then reattached and stabilized with a plate. So that's a much bigger procedure, and again, it's a salvage procedure. Given that Ortega had 2 procedures already, I'm going to assume that he had a shoulder stabilization, a soft tissue procedure, and then either a revision stabilization on its own or a revision stabilization with a remplissage. However, he may have had a Laterjet, and if he's already had a Laterjet, then he is in trouble because there are not that many options left. If he hasn't, then a Laterjet would be the next option, and then after that, we're talking humeral head osteotomy. And if all of that fails, oh, well then he is SOL without a paddle. Either live with the instability or a shoulder fusion. And I'm not sure, but I don't think he'll be able to do MMA if he has a shoulder fusion. That being said, that's it for today. As always, that's been a word from Dr. Chris, not your everyday ortho, where we see one, do one, and teach one.